9 independent lab tests on organic, single-origin beans sourced from the highest altitudes. That's what it takes to make healthy coffee. But what exactly makes Exhale healthier than the stuff you pick up at the supermarket? And is it worth twice the price? By now, many of us know coffee is pretty good for us. It helps your gut health, it's good for your brain and heart, and apparently the more you drink, the longer you live. But for a lot of people, it still feels like a guilty pleasure. If that's you, you'll want to hear what Alex Higham, founder of Exhale, has to say. Exhale is branded as ridiculously healthy coffee, claiming to have more antioxidants and polyphenols than standard coffee, and less of the bad stuff like mould, toxins and pesticides. I'm Ollie Guiu, welcome to Hack It Health and Fitness, where I meet the people behind some of the most interesting health innovations, technology and fitness hacks on the market. Today, it's the turn of Exhale Coffee, whose coffee goes through a lot to make sure it's as healthy as possible. So let's get stuck in. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I really want to just get straight in and start by asking you, what is the difference between Exhale Coffee and the regular stuff that you just pick up at the supermarket?
Big question, big one to unpack, but basically all coffee can be healthy. There's been loads of research and tens of thousands of studies on coffee and its connection to all sorts of different diseases and health conditions. And the predominantly, the studies point towards coffee being healthy. Okay. And there are certain compounds and chemicals in coffee which all these studies are citing as causing the health benefits. And we've gone through this whole process of first sourcing a coffee that's especially high in these compounds, these healthy compounds in coffee, and then roasting the coffee to maximize and retain as much of these compounds as possible, and then figuring out how best to brew it. So I'd say our coffee we use 9 different independent lab tests, and that's to find a coffee that's got more of these healthy compounds than any other is the goal. I mean, we've obviously not got more than every single coffee on the planet because we haven't tested every coffee, but that's the goal, is just to find a coffee that's especially high in the healthiest compounds in coffee.
What goes into creating the coffee with all those healthy compounds? Is it just like where it's grown? Is it the climate that it's grown in? Is it a bit of kind of luck and chance? Have you figured out exactly what is happening in the environments where that coffee is being grown that helps it be more rich in all of this stuff?
This is my favorite question. I've been hoping someone would ask this. There's so many different things at play. There are so many variables at play that impact this. And like I alluded to a minute ago, that there's 3 broad stages that coffee goes through before you drink it. Okay, and there's the sourcing, there's the roasting, and then there's the brewing. And at every one of those stages, there's loads of different factors to consider. So specifically around the sourcing of the coffee, basically, when we started this process to find the healthiest possible coffee, I spent 2 or 3 years researching the science and trying to figure out what it was in coffee that was causing these health benefits. So polyphenols were the biggest group of compounds, that are the healthiest group of compounds in coffee. Then the next line of investigation was to figure out what would lead to a coffee or a crop of coffees that would have the maximum amount of polyphenols in. So certain things kept coming up again and again. So organic is a big one. So buying organic coffee. So even if you don't buy our coffee, you should always try and buy organic coffee. So, but then it's kind of why organic? And there's been a lot of research on, and this is my favorite thing of coffee. It's just a mountain of different avenues of research and things to learn. And it kind of blows my mind a little bit. But one of my favorite things I learned recently is about kind of why organic coffee might be healthier than a non-organic coffee, or might have more chlorogenic acid in. And it's because of things called abiotic and biotic stresses on coffee, or on any food, anything in your diet. So an abiotic stress is something that's caused by something like the weather or altitude or intense sun. And biotic stress is a stress that's caused by something that's living. So it could be pests, it could be bacteria in the soil, anything that's living, the fermentation process, the type of bacteria in it. And all of these different things have an impact on the coffee and the flavor of the coffee, but also how healthy the coffee is. And there's some research which shows that organic farms, which in general, any organic farm, there's more pests in the farms, and those pests attacking the plants, The reason why plants don't need chemical and artificial pesticides is because they produce their own compounds which deter these pests. And coffee, supposedly, in reaction to pests attacking it, produces chlorogenic acid, which is the healthiest compound in coffee. So organic coffee, the theory goes, which is backed up by research, should be healthier because of these stresses, more stresses from pesticides on the crop. And then it'll produce more chlorogenic acid, and then if you treat it right, then you'll get more in the final cup of coffee. But then there's loads of other things. So coffee grown at high altitude, for example, as well. So growing at altitude is an abiotic stress. So altitude, the air is thinner. So plants and crops go through a bit more stress in the thinner air. And it's another stress in it, which leads to high levels of polyphenols and chlorogenic acid. So there's tons of things, right down to the processing of the coffee, whether it's a washed or natural process, there's differences there. So we basically come up with a list of all of these different, some just theories and some of them backed by research, and then tested coffees from around the globe to find ones and to try and detect trends, to try and find the coffee that had the highest.
I find that really interesting about the pests, because you just, the name itself, it suggests that it's just an annoyance, and you understand why pesticides are used and how that differs with organic. But the fact that here the pests are actually creating some of the health benefits of coffee, I think is quite astounding.
It is, and it goes beyond that. So in organic farms, you're going to have more pests and more trees and more of the life that kind of dies and then falls into the soil, and then the soil that will decompose in the soil and release its own nutrients into the soil. So you'll have a more nutrient diverse soil, and because of that, you'll have a more bacterially diverse and microbially diverse soil. So soil has a microbiome, just like we have gut health and gut bacteria. Soil has bacteria in it, and the richer the decomposing materials of pests and animals and plants and trees, the richer the nutrients and the richer the bacteria will be in the soil. And that's also been linked to higher concentrations of polyphenols and antioxidants in the coffee, because a richer source of nutrients in the soil will lead to stronger, healthier plants, which will grow stronger, healthier fruits. And coffee it does come from a fruit after all. So
it's kind of annoying that the healthier stuff and also the best tasting stuff is also always the most difficult stuff to find, whether it's coffee or anything else. So sourcing this kind of coffee that runs through your lab tests and that you're happy with must be a difficult but kind of fun process, I imagine. But how long did it take you to find the right kind of coffee? And when you first went into that process, you mentioned that you were basing some of your thought on theory, not necessarily proven science at this point. So was it a tricky process just trying to decide where in the world you were actually going to visit?
Yeah, I mean, we actually launched the business in lockdown, in the first lockdown, which we'll probably come on to, but we didn't visit all of these different countries. We actually visited Costa Rica about 5 or 6 years ago, and we visited loads of farms and plantations there to learn all about coffee. But when we launched the business, we went to, there was years of research. Like, I put far too much thought and planning into this business before finally plucking up the courage to quit my day job and launch the business. So there was a lot of research. And then I found the 7 top importers of specialty grade coffee in the UK, and I asked them for all of their samples that met our criteria. And we got 45 samples of different coffees back from these 7 importers. And we would have taken a coffee from anywhere in the globe, because you can get organic, high altitude, specialty grade washed coffees from anywhere in the globe, really, from Ethiopia to Colombia to Mexico. So we got these 45 coffees in, and then we had this crazy day in our back garden in the middle of the first lockdown, where we lined up these 45 coffees and we tested them. We taste tested them all initially. The main purpose of that was to look for a coffee that was highest in polyphenols. But actually, once we tasted all of these coffees, that's where the theory kind of, and the initial plans were kind of slightly had to be rewritten, because one of the theories, it's true, is Robusta coffee beans actually have higher levels of polyphenols in than Arabica coffee beans. But Arabica coffee beans taste so much better. So we had 45 coffees, and 2 or 3 of them were Robusta, so we could test that theory out ourselves. But they actually tasted pretty awful, and I was like, well, no one's going to drink this, and there's no point in having a healthy product, a healthy coffee that no one wants to drink.
Tastes like mud.
Because no one's going to drink it. So you can't actually impact the health of a nation with a product that no one's going to consume. So we're like, okay, we kind of ruled out the Robustas, and one day we might come back to them because there are some good Robustas out there now. But yeah, we kind of constantly had to rewrite what we were looking for and overlay not just health but taste and sustainability at every single stage.
That's a big phrase, impact the health of a nation. I mean, we are massive coffee drinkers. Do you think it really is that strong? Having healthier coffee is important for the general health of the nation?
Definitely. I mean, I definitely think that having healthier, I think the principles we apply to coffee, if applied to other foods and drinks in our diet, I think is the key to helping the health of the nation, definitely. And I'm not going to sit here and say coffee holds all the answers, but I definitely think that if more businesses out there take our approach to coffee and apply that to other fruits and vegetables and foods in our diet, then definitely. And the biggest reason is that coffee, just like lots of other foods in our diet, used to be really healthy. It can be really healthy. Like coffee comes from a fruit. So a coffee bean is actually a seed that grows inside a fruit. So coffee has a lot in common with fruits and vegetables. And just like other fruits and vegetables, they can be really healthy if grown right, if processed right, if handled right, and if consumed in the right way. But people have become disconnected with all of these, with things that they put in their body. And we're just trying to produce the most optimum quality coffee and showcase coffee for the health food that it can and should be. If everyone did that with all of their foods, then I think the health of the nation would be in a much better place.
How many cups do you have a day?
3 a day. 3 a day.
Three a day. Okay, good.
So
it's
not
conservative.
Yeah, exactly.
I expected that, you must have been a coffee lover beforehand, and I know you were. So I was wondering if you were going to say 5, 6 kind of cups, but that's good to know that you're conservative. That's about the same for me too. So let's talk a little bit more about the stuff you're testing for in a moment, but back to the creation of Exhale then. You said that you started it after a long period of thinking, and you started it just at the beginning of lockdown, which is, interesting timing. But tell me about the health journey which led you to create Exhale, because I know that you went through some difficulty actually, which made you think more about nutrition and health, didn't it?
Yeah, so I am now 40. I spent my 20s basically burning the candle at both ends, working a busy, crazy city London job as an accountant, and then also kind of partying quite hard and didn't care about what I put in my body, food-wise or drink-wise. And then it was amazing through my 20s, I had so much fun. And then when I hit 30, my whole health started crumbling. And I didn't realise it back then, but I started developing an autoimmune condition, which we think is rheumatoid arthritis. But when I hit 30, just a whole cascade of health issues started happening. I got some severe gut issues, brain fog, some serious joint issues, just a whole list of mast cell activation syndrome came on, spontaneous angioedemas, like you name it. Like, wow. I had all of the symptoms, and I was in and out of literally every hospital across London. All of the hospitals looking for answers, couldn't quite find any real answers. I'd just get fancy like Latin names describing one specific symptom, and get put on steroids or get put on anti-rheumatoid arthritis drugs or statins or whatever, so many things I was like prescribed at one point or another, and just nothing helped. And then I went through the whole functional medicine world and nutritional therapy world, where I just was trying to optimize my diet more, and I started just researching a lot myself around what I could do to help my health. And I can't say that I got that many more answers there either. I got a lot of answers, but none of them massively helped either. But it was through all of this research that I started, and I was researching about trying to learn how to control my own health, that I started reading more and more about coffee and how coffee could be healthy, because I was reading so many scientific papers and things, and I just kept reading that coffee was a health food. But then at the same time, I kept getting told to cut coffee out, and half of the diets I kept flipping between different diets to see if any would help, and none helped. And yeah, through all of that research, swapping around, kept reading that coffee could be healthy, and then I just realized that no one was talking about coffee as a health food. The scientists knew it. Science was there. Doctors knew it even. There was a lot of doctors back then even. Functional medicine practitioners definitely knew it, but the general public still thought of it as a guilty treat you had to cut out. So I was like, right, I need to go on the PR campaign trail for coffee and change the public opinion. So that was how the idea was born.
And continuing the story of Exhale, tell me a little bit about that surfing accident that you had in Bali.
Yeah, so that's when I first fell in love with coffee. And that was probably about 8 years ago. And I had a baby, my first baby, and we went traveling, we went backpacking to Southeast Asia, and we spent 3 months of that time in Bali. And I was surfing every day on these huge, double overhead waves over razor sharp coral, and you kind of like waist deep water. And it's life or death situations, really, and there's no exaggeration in that. And I was sleeping, I wasn't sleeping at all, and I was surfing so sleep deprived. And every day I'd get up and go for a surf, and because I was there to surf, that was the main reason for going. And one day I just had I took a massive wipe out on a wave at Uluwatu in Bali, and had a massive black eye, bust my lip, and got whiplash. And I had to see a local healer named Mr. Tendon who helped heal my neck, which was quite fun. But then, because in Bali there's so many Australians and Aussies love their coffee, there's loads of Aussie cafes there. And I basically just started visiting these Aussie cafes and just started drinking all of their specialty grade coffees and just fell in love with coffee, initially for the taste and all of the elaborate kind of ways that they brew it. But then also realized how potent it is to help your performance. So before I'd go surfing, I'd have a cup of coffee, and then I'd have the best surf of my life, even though I'd had a terrible night's sleep. So I was like, what is this magical elixir? I need to learn more about this. So that's when I fell in love with coffee.
You didn't start on instant coffee like I did.
Well, maybe I did, but maybe that's why I never fell in love with it.
Yeah, I do. I look back now and I think it tasted sort of like milky vodka, instant coffee.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on instant? I'm pretty sure I know where this is going, but does it have any health benefits at all that coffee usually is associated with?
I've written a very thorough article on instant coffee, and look, there are some studies which show that instant coffee does have antioxidants and polyphenols in it, reasonable quantities of them. So you are getting some health benefits from instant coffee. But the research is very mixed. Like, the research on coffee and fresh roasted coffee isn't mixed anymore. It is I'd say 99% positive. Unless you're pregnant, you can pretty much guarantee that coffee is going to be good for you. But instant coffee, it's more mixed, the research. So, for example, instant coffee, there's a lot of studies which show that it can contain up to 4 times the amount of mycotoxins on average. No, that's on average, 4 times the amount of mycotoxins in instant coffee. And there's also studies which separate out, for things like diabetes, the effects of coffee and its connection with diabetes. And they show that if you drink instant coffee, your chances of getting it are higher, but if you drink fresh roasted coffee, it's lower. So actually, and I'd suggest to anyone to have a look at the blog on our website, because I literally list out all of these studies and explain them. And there's some pretty significant diseases where instant they're connecting with higher risk and regular coffee are lower risk. So it's just too mixed for me, and that's why we'd never launch an instant. It's just, I'm not convinced.
Well, it tastes worse and it's worse for you, so
exactly.
Just ditch it. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned all the things that you are testing for, all the good stuff, the antioxidants, the chlorogenic acid, the polyphenols, vitamins. Why do other brands have mold and yeast in them? Because you're looking for mold and yeast free coffee, aren't you? Why are all of heavy metals, mold and yeast, why are they all present in your typical supermarket brands, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, you can trace it back to many, many different things. So, for example, back at the farm, at the plantation level. So one of the reasons why we only buy from specialty grade plantations is because they look after their crops, their coffee plants so much, because they sell their specialty grade coffee for such a high premium. It's so much more expensive than normal commodity grade coffee that they really take extra care to look after their coffee. So, for example, we visited plantations where they don't even let the pickers wear any aftershave in case it affects the coffee cherries. It's
Wow.
Crazy the lengths to go to. So we bought from specialty grade, but if you buy from real cheap commodity grade coffee plantations, like they won't look after their plants or crops anywhere near as well. So not, some of them I'm sure will, but like you just don't know. So for example, the fermentation process, you can't guarantee what types of bacteria and yeasts are involved in the fermentation process of coffee, because coffee is one of the most fermented foods in the world, which people don't realize, but there's bacteria and yeast ferment the coffee. So there could be some negative bacteria and yeast involved in that process. And then the drying of the coffee as well. So once a coffee bean's been fermented, it's put out on drying beds. And a naturally processed coffee can be left on drying beds for 3 or 4 weeks. And if they're not turned enough, so you need to constantly turn the beans. And if you don't turn them enough, then you can really develop a lot of molds, which the molds produce mycotoxins in the coffee. So if a farm isn't impeccable with the way they look after it, then a coffee can get more mycotoxins. And we have tested ones like that are hugely different. Like some of the green beans that we get from farms just have mycotoxins through the roof. And some of them are like next to nil to begin with. And you're never going to get no mycotoxins or molds in a coffee because they're there. They're all around us. They exist everywhere. But that small amount that might be left, so when we buy them from a farm, there might be some small amount left, but that's roasted off. So when you roast the coffee, a small amount of them is roasted off and you're fine. But if there's a lot on the coffee beans going into the roastery, then you're not going to roast all of it off. So right from the farm level, but then also in the storage and the transportation. So you have to store the coffee in, we buy coffee that's stored in hermetically sealed Grain Pro sacks. So some traditional ways of storing coffee are just in Hessian sacks, which are open to the elements. Ours are sealed in these, airtight kind of sealed sacks. So there's no way of contaminants getting into them. Then when the coffee is stored in the UK, it's stored in dimly lit warehouses that are temperature controlled and all these things. So it's just at every stage from farm to roastery, you just take any steps you can to minimize any risk of contamination. I've also written an article on mycotoxins on our website, which anyone who is interested should read. But if you're buying an organic specialty grade coffee, there's a good chance there's going to be a pretty low amount of mycotoxins and mold in that coffee. But if you're buying a really low quality, some of the supermarket ones, just a low quality cheap coffee that you're paying like £2 a bag, then I wouldn't touch those for many reasons. But one is that there's a very good chance that they'll have quite high levels of mycotoxins in.
And you're putting all of this under the microscope in independent laboratories across Europe. Have you been sort of involved in that laboratory process? Have you watched them as they're sort of examining and trying to figure out what is in your coffee beans?
It's funny you should ask, because there's something that I've been trying to plan since day one. So we do 9 different lab tests and we send them out to different laboratories. But my favourite one is our antioxidant test, which is done down in Plymouth. And you probably read it on our website or in some of our marketing materials. It's a stat we love talking about. And it was an antioxidant test which found that 1 brewed cup of our coffee has the same antioxidants as 55 oranges or 12 punnets of blueberries in 1 cup of coffee. And that was done at a lab called Knight Scientific down in Plymouth. And the owner of that lab, Dr. Jan Knight, she invented this AbleRack test, which is the world's leading antioxidant test for foods. And she's become, quite a good friend, I'd say, since then. We speak a lot on the phone and I'm advising her on her own business endeavours. And we're hoping to launch we're in the process of launching a joint application for an Innovate UK research grant, which would be very exciting. But the plan is to spend some time with her down at the lab in Plymouth and do all sorts of fun testing on, and especially if we get this grant, I'll be spending a lot of time with Dr. Jan and we'll be geeking out on all things coffee and science, definitely. So
absolutely love it. When it comes to the caffeine content, are you looking for high, low, medium? What exactly goes into the caffeine side of things?
We don't specifically look for high, low or medium. I mean, we do have a decaf. That's a separate topic. But yeah, caffeine has always had mixed press. People advise that you cut down on caffeine, cut back on caffeine, but the research doesn't say that. The science doesn't say that, and I am one for following the science, as you might have gathered. The science on caffeine is pretty conclusive that if you have a healthy relationship with caffeine is very good for you. And actually, there's another article for a bit of background reading for people on our website, which is the one on cholesterol, but there's a whole section at the beginning of that where I argue the point that caffeine is good for you. And I cite 12 different studies there, but there's loads of research out there, and caffeine's good for lots of different things, especially around the kind of mental, the brain health benefits of coffee, the protection against things like Alzheimer's and dementia. Caffeine really helps against decaf coffee, basically.
For me, I've got an interesting relationship with caffeine in that I would say that I'm a bit of a caffeine non-responder. So I can have my cup of coffee in the morning, and honestly, it's not doing a lot for me in terms of energy. I just absolutely love the taste of coffee, so I keep on drinking it throughout the morning. I stop around 2 o'clock just in case it disrupts my sleep, but to be honest, I think I get it from my dad. He has a cup of coffee before he goes to bed, which seems crazy to a lot of people who
so
get
does
like
my
a
dad
real
has
hit off
one.
of it.
My dad has one right before bed. He's 84. He has one right before bed, and then if he wakes up in the night, he'll go downstairs and have a double espresso at 4 a.m. and then go back to bed.
No way.
So
That's
funny.
so funny. Yeah, and I thought, right, well, people always talk about how great it is when they get that first caffeine hit of the morning, and I always thought, I mean, yeah, it's fine. I mean, the taste great, and it takes me a many coffees to get any jitters, and we'll talk about jitters in a little bit. But I saw an article that you put out about this sort of common idea that caffeine has a half-life of I think it's 8 hours. Is that right? But that's not necessarily true for all people, because everyone has an individual caffeine response. So to sort of have this coverall idea that caffeine has one effect on people is a bit wrong, basically. What would you say to that?
You see this across the whole breadth of comms and coffee. People love telling you that you should react to coffee in a certain way, and everyone has their own biases, their own health issues or conditions, their own businesses, which lead them to push their own dogmatic beliefs on other people, and it's just not based on that much science. And if it is based on science, it's based on cherry-picked science, so with massive amounts of confirmation bias. But yeah, coffee's half-life, people say 8 hours, but coffee's half-life can be between 4 hours and something like 16 hours, because we're all so different. And actually how you react to coffee depends on lots of different things, one of which is your genetics. And you have 2 genes in your body, the CYP1A2 gene and the ADORA2A gene, which code for how quickly you break down the caffeine or metabolize it, and then how quickly you absorb it, basically, or feel effects from it. And even those 2 types of genes, people think it's black and white, and people say, oh, you're either a slow metabolizer or a fast metabolizer. But actually, there's loads of different variants of the CYP1A2 gene, and there's loads of different variants of the ADORA2A one. So you can have dozens, if not hundreds, of different combinations of those 2 that affect how you react to coffee. But overlaid with that is things like your liver health. So your liver clears caffeine, so processes caffeine. So your liver health has a big part to play in how quickly you react to it, how much jitters you might feel. But also, there's things like the quality of the coffee as well, whether it is high in mycotoxins and things like that, and whether it's high in polyphenols. But yeah, so there's so much out there, and it's so different. So you've got to just listen to your own body. And in all of these things, listen to your own body, your own biology. And if you're someone who does feel, jitters or anxious feelings within for the first couple of hours after drinking a coffee, then maybe you are someone who should drink, smaller quantities, weaker coffees, less frequent, make a half calf, drink decaf. There's loads of ways, but just listen to your own body. Don't follow someone else's belief.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'm either genetically gifted or I've sort of lost the genetic lottery. I don't know which, because I'd love to feel that big perk that you get from a hit of caffeine in the morning. But I'm also equally happy that I can enjoy the taste of coffee into the evening if I really wanted to.
You're probably very habituated to caffeine and coffee, and as am I. So
you say that, but I tried going decaf. Okay. I went decaf for a month before sort of assessing exactly where I was at. I bought decaf coffee and that was all I was drinking. I wasn't drinking any other caffeinated drinks. And it made no difference to how I felt in the morning, how I slept, the level of tiredness, or at least my assessed level of tiredness. And I thought, well, if it's doing nothing, if decaf's not doing anything to me, I might as well just go back on the caffeine. And that was after a month. And I didn't get any of the usual side effects that people report when they go off caffeine. I didn't get headaches. I didn't feel extra tired or lethargic. So I do wonder whether there's something going on within sort of the genetics, something deeper.
Yeah, people over-egg the effects of coffee and caffeine on you. People love talking about it, and people love talking about it who love promoting coffee alternatives. For example, everyone talks about the jitters. I don't really know anyone who has any real anxious feelings from coffee. I just know a lot of people who bloody love drinking coffee and it's their favourite drink. So I don't know where all these people are. So I think there are some, but it's just not as big a deal as people make out.
Well, XL claims to have jitter-free, or at least less jitters for people who drink your coffee versus other coffee, and that's to do, I think, with the amount of polyphenols in the coffee. Is that right? It sort of counteracts the effects of the caffeine.
It did. You did your research, definitely. So the polyphenols are anxiolytic. So polyphenols are plant compounds that you get in lots of fruit and vegetables. And if people haven't really heard much about them, they're the other thing in fruits and vegetables. So fruits and vegetables are vitamins and minerals, and everyone knows about them. They're kind of old news now. They're not as trendy. Polyphenols are the other thing in fruits and vegetables that make them really healthy. And we're starting to realize now that they actually play a pretty big role in what makes healthy fruit and vegetables healthy. And it's the same for coffee. Coffee is a very rich source of polyphenols. There's actually 7 studies, which I love talking about, which the first one was in 2004, a Norwegian study, which showed that coffee can contribute 66% of your total dietary intake of polyphenols. So 2/3 of your intake of polyphenols come from coffee, which is insane. People don't realize how much is in coffee. But coffee has polyphenols in vastly different quantities. And these polyphenols are anxiolytic, so that means they reduce anxiousness. So having a coffee that's high in polyphenols, the polyphenols can counteract some of the negative effects of the caffeine. So some people who would normally feel negative effects from caffeine, having high levels of polyphenols will counteract those and mean that you have a bit more of a stable level high from the caffeine. So yeah, we get a lot of people, like if you read our Trustpilot reviews, there's a lot of people who say they can't drink other coffees, but they can drink ours. So it's quite good when the theory or the science plays out in our customer base and it plays out in actual real life people. So it's quite fun to watch.
Yeah, and it's really nice to know for me as somebody who doesn't necessarily respond to the caffeine, as I've mentioned, that there's just so much else going on in coffee that I can benefit from, and it's still worth drinking, not just for the taste, but for loads of other health benefits too. I have another one because my sister keeps her coffee in the fridge. Some people keep it in the freezer. I just keep it in the cupboard. Is there a right way of keeping your coffee?
There is, and there's definitely a wrong way as well. And keeping it in the fridge is not recommended. So I'd say avoid keeping it in the fridge. So the biggest reason is the potential contamination that can happen in the fridge. So for 2 reasons, your fridge is full of molds floating around in the atmosphere in your fridge, whether you like to believe it or not. Our fridges do have...
I believe it.
There is stuff floating around in our fridge that we'd rather not admit to being there. And coffee, if left in a bag in the fridge, if it's not quite perfectly sealed, the bag, then it is at risk of contamination. And then the other reason is if you take the bag of coffee in and out of the fridge from a cold environment to a warm environment to a cold to a warm, that can cause condensation to happen on the inside of the bag of coffee. And condensation is also a breeding ground for molds, which would produce mycotoxins. So we say, don't keep it in the fridge. That is the number one golden rule. And I imagine there's a lot of people listening to this who are going to run to their fridge now and take the coffee out.
And that's going to make it more moldy. It's not your next bag.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is you can freeze coffee. Coffee does freeze well. So we would say wrap it in something tightly, put it in the freezer, and it can freeze well for a few months quite easily. But take it all out in one batch and just let it defrosts it defrosts really, really quickly, 10 minutes, or less even. So you can freeze it, but I wouldn't dip in and out of it in the freezer. Just leave it in, take it out after a few months. But I'd say if you're going to drink coffee, if you have coffee beans, buying coffee beans is the best way. This is probably a whole different topic, but as soon as you grind coffee, as soon as you roast coffee, its polyphenols start degrading. Okay. And then as soon as you grind coffee, the speed that the polyphenols degrade accelerates. So if you buy ground coffee, the surface area of the coffee granules exposed to the air and oxygen in the air, which is causing the staling, is huge. It's like thousands of times greater than if you buy them in beans. So ground coffee stales faster. So if you want fresh coffee, buy them in beans. And if you do buy beans, it will quite happily stay in its pouch for 2 months. And if you want to really optimize the storage of coffee, the number one thing to do is to buy a storage container that either pushes out the air or creates a vacuum environment to store the beans in. And we have something called an airscape, which is kind of which is unbelievable. Like, and we actually lab tested it. So we tested coffee left in the airscape for 6 weeks versus coffee left in its pouch for 6 weeks. And the coffee left in an airscape lost just 2% of its polyphenols, and the coffee left in its pouch lost 12%. So that's how big a difference it makes.
And it looks cool. I've seen it. I think it was on Instagram, and like just the sound that it makes as the air kind of comes out as you're popping out your coffee. There's something feels very satisfying about it, I think.
Yeah, and there's quite a few different versions. You don't have to get an airscape, but they're the ones that we tested them all, and they're our favourite. So we've gone with airscapes.
Just a few final questions. One is why your coffee is better for the environment. Why is that?
We as a business, we're best for the environment. So we're B Corp, which means that we are legally committed to try and make our business better for the environment. We're legally committed to equally prioritising our impact on the environment, on people, alongside profits. But that's something we did from day one, and I always wanted to launch the business as sustainable as possible. So right from only buying organic coffee, for example, chemical pesticides used on non-organic farms do pollute the environment, and there's a lot of research there. But as a business, we just continually changing, doing lots of different things to try and make our coffee as sustainable as possible. So one example is last year, we in March 2023, we made a switch. So we used to sell our coffee in 225 gram pouches. So we switched and we changed all of our subscribers and our whole business model to only sell double-sized bags of coffee. So 450 grams in the pouch as opposed to 225 grams. So overnight, we halved the amount of packaging we use, and we halved the deliveries that we do, which halved our carbon footprint of our outbound logistics. So literally, like overnight, we just had this huge environmental win. And it's decisions like that we're continually making in the business to have like actual tangible environmental impact. So when you're sending 10,000 pouches of coffee out and you suddenly just change the business and you're only sending 5,000 out, that's a big win for the planet. We can debate all day whether, so we use plastic-free packaging, we use compostable packaging made from renewable plant-based sources. And you can debate all day whether that's the best form of packaging. Some people say recyclable plastic is. I disagree. But what you can't debate is that halving the amount of packaging you use isn't a huge environmental win. And doing that made a lot of things a lot more difficult for the business. Like, it's harder now to convince people to buy a £20 or £18 bag of coffee. So they're used to spending, £6, £7 in a bag of coffee. So our coffee was already expensive, but now we have to convince people to buy an £18, £20 bag of coffee. So it's, as a business, it didn't help us in many ways, but it was a huge environmental win. It also helped our business in other ways, though. It helped our margins and that kind of thing. But it's, just not being afraid to make big, bold moves if one is on the table.
Because when it comes down to the price, it is more expensive fundamentally, isn't it, than the stuff that you pick up at the supermarket, and that may be where people make their decision. But you also pay 5 to 10 times more than the fair trade price for coffee beans as well, don't you?
Yeah, so I've found out exactly what we do pay and what the fair trade price is. So we actually pay, the fair trade price is 180 cents per pound, and we pay 280 cents per pound. So it's actually 55% more than the fair trade price, which still is a huge amount. And, it means that, the farmer's getting 55% more than they would if they went down the fair trade route. But the price that we pay for the coffee is 5 to 8 times more than the fair trade price. But the farmer gets paid, a significant amount more than he would, definitely.
And despite that cost being reflected in the slightly higher price of Exhale. I mean, you've listed all of the differences and the benefits. So you see that sort of trade-off as worth it, giving more money to the farmers, but also just producing a higher quality coffee, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're buying a bag of coffee for £2 or £3 for a bag of coffee, you've just got to question, like, you know, who is that adding value to? Who is actually benefiting from that coffee? And you're gonna, you know, you're not going to benefit. You're not going to get many health benefits from that coffee. But then also the farmer's not going to really benefit. And then the whole supply chain, you've just got to wonder what corners are being cut in the supply chain. And it's just, I think we're trying to produce a product that benefits everyone throughout our entire supply chain, just by being reasonable with everyone that's involved, not pushing too hard. So.
And is your decaf just as healthy? I know you mentioned that caffeine has its own health benefits, but you do put it through a particular process that doesn't use all the chemicals, right? So do you still get as many antioxidants and polyphenols through your decaf blend?
Yes. So popular question. And decaf is pretty much as healthy. So we use decaf had a bad rep for years because traditional decaf methods used some pretty nasty chemicals, which are used in paint stripper and nail varnish remover, and people love throwing these examples around. So obviously there's debate around how much harm they cause in the body. It's legal to use these things in coffee production. Some people say, well, because it's legal, it must be okay for you. But ultimately, if you know, the less toxins we can put in our body, the better, in my opinion. So there are also a few decaffeination processes now which use only water. So the Swiss water method is the number one process. But and this goes back to your earlier question on sustainability as well, is that the Swiss water process, so if we bought a coffee in Mexico, no one there could decaffeinate the coffee using the Swiss water process. So we'd have to ship it to Germany to have it decaffeinated, and then from Germany to England. So the carbon footprint of that coffee before it reaches the UK is pinballed all around the world. Whereas we found a decaffeination process called the mountain water process, which is done in Mexico. And because of that, we buy Mexican beans, which are grown within a couple of 100 miles of the decaffeination plant. So we buy Mexican beans, we send them to this decaffeination plant. They're decaffeinated with the mountain water process, and then they're shipped once to the UK. So it helps our sustainability side. But also, the mountain water process it only uses pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico, no nasty chemicals to decaffeinate the coffee. And as a result, that leaves more of the polyphenols in the coffee. So you are getting a coffee that tastes, many experts wouldn't be able to tell that our decaf is a decaf coffee. And it's also pretty much as good for you as a regular coffee. Not quite, but pretty much.
Actually, a question I meant to ask you before, just about your health, because you mentioned all of the problems that you did have. Now you've integrated healthy coffee into your life and probably a lot of other healthy things, not just coffee. How are you now? Are you sort of recovered from all of those symptoms that you previously had?
So my health has been a journey for the last 10 years. It's been a long, brutal journey, and I've shed many tears over it, and many different conditions, many different symptoms have like flared up at any one time and caused some serious issues. And like I said before, I've tried every diet under the sun. I've cut every food out of my diet. I've tried everything, and I developed an eating disorder. You could definitely say, like, I was afraid of most foods, that they would cause some kind of flare up of some type of ailment, and they did. And most foods were giving me brain fog or giving me some severe gut issues or whatever it was. And over time, I've just realized that none of that really helped. None of these things really helped, and I tried every supplement and fad new superfood on the market, and none of them really helped. You just spend a lot of money on these things, but none of them really help. And then in the last few years, I've started to realize that actually there is another way of health and wellness that is a bit more following nature, a bit more holistic maybe. And in the last 3 years, I eat pretty much every food again now, but so long as the food isn't, I avoid ultra processed foods and food that's got artificial crap in it. Foods that are full of emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners and just anything artificial. So cut it out of my diet. And I also I spend a lot more time just out in the sunlight or walking barefoot or in nature or doing something fulfilling like launching a business that you deeply, deeply love and enjoy in every way. So I think all of those things have a huge impact on your health, like way bigger an impact. And like in the morning, I have a really good morning routine now, and it just involves a bit of breath work, some stretches, strength training, exercise, all the usual things that everyone tells you, all the things that are free as well. It doesn't cost money to live like this. But then in the last 3 years since adopting this lifestyle more, my symptoms are pretty much, I'd say 95% improved to what they were.
Amazing.
Almost there. I've also, as part of that, I was living in London, and this isn't an easy one for a lot of people, but I decided to, after 15 years in London, I wanted to move out. So I've moved to live on the coast in Portugal. So part of that was I live by the beach in Portugal. So I have a very outdoors life now, which has helped as well. And all of these things, it's just, they're the things that actually move the needle in terms of your health, not like taking a new medicinal mushroom from Siberia, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I've got to say, just moving out of London for me as well did wonders for my health, just getting out of the toxic air. And I've benefited a lot from going the sort of semi-rural. A final question then, is there one big coffee myth that you would just love to bust, that you would just love to put an end to right now?
Yeah, it's that everybody should drink black coffee. That the only way of drinking coffee is black coffee. You shouldn't add milk or even sugar to coffee. There's a bit of a dogmatic belief that coffee snobs, promote that drinking black coffee is the only way to drink it. And there are a couple of research papers that were published which shows that adding milk, the proteins in the milk, I think it might be, hinder your body's ability to absorb the polyphenols. So a lot of influencers a year or two ago jumped on that and say that you shouldn't add coffee to milk because it negates the health benefits. But actually, I've done a lot of research into it, and I've written another article on this because I love busting these coffee myths. And actually, there's way more research which shows that adding milk to coffee enhances its health benefits, and it's just like adding fats to. So when you eat a tomato, if you have olive oil on the tomato, I think the fats in the olive oil bond to the lycopene in the tomato and help your body absorb them. So it's a similar thing with adding milk. Potentially, if you add whole milk to coffee, the fats in the milk in the coffee help your body absorb polyphenols. And there's actually more studies which support that argument. And the same thing goes for adding sugar or sweeteners to coffee. So you obviously shouldn't be adding 10 teaspoons of sugar to your coffee or drinking Starbucks caramel macchiatos, whatever the hell they are. You shouldn't be drinking all of that. But if you're someone who likes to, like my wife, Kirsty, a co-founder, she adds milk to her coffee, and she adds half a teaspoon of an organic raw sugar. And again, there's no research that shows at all that adding a small amount of sugar to your coffee is a bad thing. So yeah, that's a huge myth. And there's a huge psychological mental health benefit to drinking coffee. Like, people love it. So if you enjoy drinking your coffee with milk in with half a teaspoon of sugar, you bloody well do that, and don't let anybody stop you, is my argument.
Great, I will keep drinking my white coffees then. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I think I might have to go make a cuppa now.
No, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been really fun.
Alex Higham, founder of Exhale Coffee there. You can read all the articles he mentioned at exhalecoffee.com. In my next episode, I'm speaking to the guy who invented weighted blankets, Keith Stavalic, and you'll never guess how he came up with the idea. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Remember, you don't need all the latest gadgets and upgrades to be healthy. It's the fundamentals that matter most: sleep, nutrition, and exercise. I just find all the extra stuff fun too. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.